Welcome to a new episode of The Opening School. In this week's episode, we'll continue with analyzing the Slav defense, and we will pick up from where we ended last week. In our analysis of the Slav defense, we've come to reach this position. A total of 5 moves have been played, and Alfred, what can you tell us about this position?
Already at first sight, you see that the position is quite complex, and playing black in this position, it can be a bit difficult to figure out what to do about your c4 pawn, especially after moves like e3 or knight to e5. The probably most important thing to know in this situation is simply that the pawn is lost, and that black instead should concentrate on developing the rest of its position.
Keep in mind that black is already a pawn up, so losing the pawn on c4 won't lead to a material disadvantage. You mentioned that white can choose between e3 and knight to e5 in this position. How is that decision made? What should be taken into consideration when deciding what to play here?
Well, these two moves are considered equally strong, but they do lead the game into 2 separate lines. White's 6th move e3 is a calm move which goes straight to the point. Black cannot protect his pawn on c4, and thus there is no reason not to capture it. And if you should capture it, why not develop a piece in the same time? You should not trick yourself into believing that this simple move will lead to a simple position. As I said, the position is very complex, and by introducing yet another piece into the game, white only heightens the level of complexity. Knight to e5 is a more ambitious move. White plays to conquer the entire center by playing f3 followed by e4, and if white succeeds, it's often considered that white has won the opening stage. Of course, black has some good answers against this line, and the game often turns into very unclear positions.
The choice between these 2 moves depends on your own playing style and preferences. This varies from player to player, and you have to make the choice for yourself. In this situation, you choose either a complex positional game or a complex tactical game. Either way, it's important to analyze the variations in depth, and it can be very hard to choose which line fits you the best right away. My tip is to look up some games where this variation has been played, and this will show you the different ways the games will usually pan out and what variations might occur. We won't go deeper into analyzing any specific games this time, but Alfred, can you show us the most common continuation after white's e3?
Of course. After white's e3, black should play e6. Once again, I feel the need to stress the point that black should give up on the c4 pawn, and that bishop to e6 should be avoided. This partly since the move loses a tempo. We did play bishop to f5 after all, but also since this move is simply bad. The bishop will be placed in a square from which it is no future, and the only thing it accomplishes is that it blocks the f8 bishop from developing properly. This is why black should follow white's example and play e6. White can now capture on c4, and black answers by playing bishop to b4, after which white castles and black follows.
So far, we've seen how both sides have been building up their positions by developing their pieces. The position seems to have become both calmer and less complex. Is this really the case, or is this just the calm before the storm, so to speak?
Well, the position does look calm, doesn't it? A storm can of course occur, and you can never guarantee that nothing will happen, and you'll have to be on guard. But with that said, no hurricanes usually spring forth from this position. Simply said, this position is calm, but that doesn't mean that it won't be complex. White can from this position choose between queen to e2 and knight to h4, and actually these 2 moves also lead the game into 2 very separate lines. After queen to e2, we notice that the white plan is to play e4, a move which black should try to block. Otherwise, white will get the full control over the center. But even so, many players allow the white advancement in the center.
How come?
Well, that is a good question. I guess you could say it's a bit like feeding the greedy until they eat themselves to death. But the easiest way to explain it will simply be to show you how the game will continue. Now black usually plays knight b to d7, against which white plays e4. Followed by black's bishop to g6. If we take a closer look at the position, we see that white has a territorial advantage, which was created by the conquering of the center. But we also see that the same center is white's greatest weakness. It has grown bigger than white can control, and at this point it is under especially strong pressure from the black pieces. One should also note that white's previous a4 left a hole in b4, which makes it virtually impossible for white to successfully pull off an attack on the queen's side.
As we said, this position seems to be very calm, but even so, it is extremely complex. How does black continue here? Right now, black has a solid position which is practically impenetrable, and simultaneously, black has an attack against the white center. The strategy for black in this position is to balance these two factors. If one of them were to disappear because of careless play, the black position would rapidly become two-dimensional and fall apart before too soon. So, in conclusion, the Slav defense is a variation which allows for many different possibilities, and this in turn allows you to find the variation which fits you the best. There are few things as difficult as playing a game where you are forced to adapt to a playing style that doesn't suit you. With that, we end this week's episode of The Opening School. We'll be back again next week with more on the Slav defense, so see you then.